Welcome to the second part of my Artificial Intelligence for Writers tutorial. This one is about plotting and how to get an AI to help you create storylines and plot ideas, and then how to break those down into scenes and expand them to get more and more detail in your stories. I'm Christian Darkin, and I'm a writer and animator, and I've been involved in creative industries my whole life, one way or another. And what I'm seeing right now in artificial intelligence creativity is so phenomenal that I think everyone should be looking at it. I'm building some tools for writers, and you can download them in the links below. So like and subscribe and go and take a look at some of the files that I've got down there. So, can a computer create stories? The answer is yes, but I'm not trying to replace writers here. I want to use artificial intelligence as a writing partner, not as some kind of replacement for creativity, but as a way to do creative work of a kind and a quality that neither humans nor machines could do on their own. That's what collaboration's about. And make no mistake, this is collaboration. So what have I made? Well, the basic tool that we're going to talk about today allows you to take in text files and use them as an inspiration for coming up with story ideas. You can feed it with genres, you can give it characters to base its story on, you can give it news items or a piece of historical evidence that you want it to brainstorm with, and it'll come out with multiple synopses for stories based on those ideas. Now, I can see writers right now saying, well, look, this is just nonsense. A computer's not imaginative, it's not creative. And even if it was, when you write fiction, the prosaic kind of what happened next plot sequence, it's just the surface of your story. What matters to you as a writer is all driven by a kind of undercurrent of obsessions, of ideas, of things that you want to communicate that you're only barely aware of yourself. And if you could express them in some other way, then, well, you wouldn't need to write fiction. So how's a computer going to help you with that? Well, I think that's all true. But the beauty of the tool that I'm trying to create is you can give it whatever you want to chew on. If you want to give it a philosophical dilemma, or a description of a sunset, or an argument you overheard on a bus, or the lyrics to Hotel California, just do that. Just load that information in as text files and let it generate 20, 30 ideas based on that. Then after you've done that, pick the ones you like. You know, mash them together, rewrite them, use them to spark your own inspiration and work from there. Okay, let's start making some stories. So let me just minimize my screen so that I'm a little figure in the background. So what I have here is a script on the GitHub repo, which you can download and try and use yourself, as long as you've got access to GPT3 and you know how to install Python on your system. If you don't, you can still download that. You can still use the link below to download the files, and you can have a look at what's already been created. So this one is called number 2, create some synopses. So what we're going to do is we're going to create some story synopses. Now, the first thing it's going to ask, this code creates synopses you can create from scratch, or you can use other text files such as story backgrounds, series information, or characters. In other words, I can load in, if I want to, a text file, and that text file can be absolutely anything I want to inspire my stories. In the past, I've let me open up some I've already done. Synopses. So in the past, I've done historical novels. I've done stories inspired by quotes. So in other words, I've loaded in a quote and got it to generate stories based on the quote. I've created all sorts of different stories, and you can load in anything you like, or you don't have to. You can type in a genre. Right now, it's asking me for the genre of my story. I'm going to leave that. I'm going to say science fiction. Let's say a science fiction story. Science fiction. I can load in any supporting files I like, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to go to create a story. Now I can add any additional info I want, a short description of what kind of story I want to make. I could do a kid's story about robots. I could do a story in which the character I've just loaded in is the hero if I'd loaded something in, but no, I'm not. I'm going to do a story set on an alien planet. Right, I mean that's fairly vague, but choose a folder to save it in. I can be as vague or as specific as I want to. I'm going to create a new directory, a new folder, sci-fi. Now, if I was writing a specific sci-fi story, select that folder. How many stories do I want to brainstorm? Let's do 5 now. Sci-fi. So it's now asking GPT-3, it's asking the artificial intelligence to come up with something based on what I've given it. I haven't given it very much. If I was really going for this, I would probably do I'd probably give it a background of the kind of planet that I wanted the story to be set on, or I could give it some kind of clue about the characters I wanted to be in it. That I can do just by putting it in a text file and saving it. So let's see what's being created in my sci-fi directory. First story that's appeared. The story begins on an alien planet that is going through a massive drought. The main character is a young girl out in the desert trying to find food for her family. She comes across a plant that she's never seen before and decides to take it home with her. When she gets home, she shows it to her father and he tells her that it's a rare and valuable plant that can only be found on this planet. He tells her to take it to the market and sell it for as much as she can. The girl takes the plant to the market and sells it for a high price. She's able to buy food for her family and can help them survive the drought. However, the plant is also very dangerous, and it soon becomes clear that it's killing people who consume it. The girl's father tells her to destroy the plant before it can harm anyone else. I thought she'd sold it, but still. The girl takes the plant back to the desert and sets it on fire. As she watches it burn, she realizes she's made the right decision, that she's saved lives by destroying the plant. Okay, well, that was a bit of a strange one. Story begins with the arrival. This is a new story. The story begins with the arrival of a group of human explorers on an alien planet. The planet is inhabited by a race of intelligent aliens called the Dramians. I've never heard of them. Now, this is one thing that the artificial intelligence GPT-3 does do. You give it some information, and sometimes it will generate strange new ideas. Other times, it will copy things it's already read about, and it's already read about everything. So before you go with any stories you've generated here, check out that it's not plagiarizing something. Anyway, the story says the humans are immediately impressed by the aliens' advanced technology and their builders. However, they soon realise that the Dramians are not friendly. The aliens attack the humans and capture them. The humans are taken to the Dramians' capital city where they're put on trial. They're accused of being invaders. Okay, so it's humans invading another planet. They demand that they be destroyed. However, the humans argue that they're not invaders, but merely explorers. They point out that they come in peace and have no intention of harming the Dramians. The aliens are not convinced, but they decide to spare the humans for now. They send them back to their ship and warn them never to return. The human explorers are confused and angry about what's happened. They decide to go back to Earth and tell their story. However, when they arrive, they find their planet has been destroyed by an alien race called the Zorites. Okay. The Zorites were at war with the Dramians, and they decided to destroy Earth in order to get revenge on the humans. The humans are now the last survivors of their race, and they must find a way to survive in a hostile galaxy. So as you can see, these there's another one. The story begins with a team of astronauts landing on an alien planet. They're there to explore the planet and collect data. One of the astronauts is killed. The team makes it back to their ship and leaves the planet, but they're now heading back to Earth with the data they've collected. On the way, they receive a distress call from another ship. The ship is under attack. The team decides to help and fights off the aliens. They're successful, but at the cost of another astronaut's life. The team finally makes it back to Earth with the data. They're able to warn other humans about the aliens and help prepare for an attack. So as you can see, it does produce all sorts of different stories. And these are just starting points. I wouldn't advise you to just take one of these stories. You're not being a writer if you do that, if you just take one of these stories and run with it. But once you've got some, but what I would do is I would use it to brainstorm several different approaches to the same set of ideas and inspirations that you've got, and then mash them together, then try and create out and use them as a jumping off point to come up with your own ideas and develop a synopsis of your own. So what do you do once you've got a synopsis? Well, as you can see, these synopses are pretty small and not very detailed. So what you want to do is create some more detail. Now let's have a look at how we might do that. Okay, so now that we've got some very brief story outlines, we can break them down using a few different other tools. I've got a tool here called, let me just minimize my screen. I've got a tool here that I've written called, I want to make me smaller. That's better. So I've got a tool here called the story structure tool. And what this will allow me to do is break down my story as a hero's journey, which is a standard way of from Hollywood of breaking down a story, or as a Save the Cat beat sheet, or as a 3-act structure. Let's go for a hero's journey, this particular one. Now, we can pick one of the stories we've already got, one of our sci-fi stories, or yeah, why don't we pick one of our sci-fi stories? Interesting to note here that when it comes to so what it's doing is it's taking one of our sci-fi stories, turning it into a hero's journey. Interesting to note here that sometimes when you get it to generate synopses, it does something really original, and sometimes it doesn't. So here I've asked it for historical novels, and just as an example, the story begins in 1815 at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. Europe's in a state of flux and England's no exception. The aristocratic families who have held power for centuries are being challenged by a new breed of wealthy industrialists. Now, this sounds like a setup for quite an interesting historical novel. Among them is the Dashwood family, who have made their fortune in coal mining. The patriarch of the family, Henry Dashwood, is this starting to sound familiar? Is leaving his wife with, has died, leaving his wife and 3 daughters penniless. His son. This is the story of Sense and Sensibility. It's got a huge amount of information that the artificial intelligence already knows, and like any of us, sometimes without noticing it slips into plagiarism. So before you're going to take on a story, before you get too excited about a story, do check that it hasn't been already told by someone else. So it's now broken the story down into a hero's journey, and I don't know if you can see here what we've got, but it's got ordinary world. The story begins on an alien planet that's going through a cataclysmic event. Call to adventure. The protagonist, a scientist, is tasked with finding a new planet for the aliens to live on. Refusal of the call. This is a standard set, a list of things that that happen, the checkpoints, if you like, in your story. That's very widely used in Hollywood. you have a call to adventure, you refuse the call, you meet a mentor, you cross the threshold, that means you go and start your adventure. You have tests, allies, enemies, you have approaches, the climax of the story and the resolution. And so what this is doing is it's attempting to break this story down, this little synopsis that we've got, into those events, which can be quite useful. Also worth editing and changing if you're going to do it yourself. So that's just one little utility that I've got. The other thing, and the more useful thing that you can do with your story is you can break it down your synopsis into a scene list. So let's start by doing that. What should we have? Zombie romance or stories with the theme of loneliness? Let's do stories with the theme of loneliness. Let's see what this one's like. The story begins with the protagonist, a young woman feeling isolated. No, let's not have that one. Let's go for yeah, okay. Let's have this one. Right, so I've chosen one of my synopses and I want to break it down into scenes. First thing it's saying, it's usually best to start dividing into a small number of scenes, less than 10, then dividing those scenes where appropriate. How many scenes would you want in your story? Well, I'm going to say 10, roughly 10. Right, so what it's doing now is it's asking GPT-3 to look at my story and divide it into scenes. Now, the synopsis of the story is, this story begins with a young girl feeling isolated and alone in her small town. She feels like an outcast. Her family doesn't seem to understand her. The only thing she has to look forward to is spending time with her horse. One day she comes across a lost dog, decides to take it in. From then on, she spends all her time with the dog. It brings her happiness, but one day the dog runs away and she eventually finds the dog at the pound, but it's been adopted by another family. This is tragic. The young girl is crushed, but decides to be happy for Copper and let him go. She realises that even though she is alone, she can still find happiness in other things. Okay, so what it's decided is scene 1. The protagonist feels isolated. She's an outcast at school. Scene 2. The protagonist's family doesn't seem to understand her. So it's breaking it down into scenes. And when I now go to my so it's breaking it down into scenes. I get the choice to either accept this and save it or decide to redo it. I think I'm going to redo it. So let's redo that. If you don't like it, you can just redo it. So let's see what it comes up with this time. A young girl sitting in her room, looking around her at all her things. She feels like an outsider in her own life. This has got a little bit more detail in it. And can't seem to find a place where she belongs. Scene 2. The young girl is in school, surrounded by other students who seem to be having fun and enjoying themselves. She feels left out and alone. Scene 3. The young girl is spending time with her horse, who she loves dearly. She feels like a sense of peace and happiness when she's with him. So we're starting to get this is a decent enough list of scenes. Let's save them. So I can hit number 1, accept and save, pick a folder to store my scenes. Scene lists, I'm going to do new folder. Lonely girl, let's call it Lonely Girl. Next folder. Now it's asking me whether I want to put a primer in the story. So sometimes it's absolutely fine just to have, and in this case it's absolutely fine just to have this bit of information, the scene files that we've got, and just let it go. Sometimes if you've got a science fiction story with a very complex backstory, or you've got some characters you've spent quite a lot of time developing, you might want to save a primer file, which is just a text file in which you've written details that are going to have to be used every time you come to write about this scene. Every time you come to write one of these scenes. So just think about it as the background detail of your story. So let's now go and see what we've saved out. Look in scene lists, in Lonely Girl, and now what it's saved there is all our scenes numbered as scene 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. Scene 1 is the young girl is sitting at home looking at all her things. She feels like an outsider in her own life. She can't seem to find a place where she belongs. Scene 2, the young girl at school. Now these are fine, but they're not very detailed. In order to have a decent story, you're going to have to do a little bit more than this, especially if it's a long form story like a novel or a screenplay. You're going to want a lot more detail in your scenes than this. So I'm going to pick one. So what you would do as a writer is you would see what you like about this structure and what you don't like about it. See what you like about these scenes and what you don't like about them. And then you'd go into the text files and you'd edit them. You'd write and rewrite to create something with more detail, more interest. So here we've got scene 3. The young girl is spending time with her horse, whom she loves dearly. She feels a sense of peace and happiness when she's with it. It's fine, but it's a bit vague. So I'm going to call her Jane. Jane is at the stables. So Jane is at the stables. We see her going in, meeting her horse, Goldie. She spends time grooming the horse. We meet, I don't know, Anthony, a boy of her age, Jane's age. Who is looking after the horses in his mother's stable. Jane likes Anthony, but Anthony is not interested in her. So we've created a bit more detail there, but we want more than that. That detail is still way too loose for a detailed story, to create a detailed story. But what we can do is we can run the same program, breaking down the synopsis into a scene list, on our scenes. So let's load, instead of loading the synopsis of the whole story, what we're now going to do is load the synopsis from the scene lists. We're going to load scene 3. So what it's now doing, how many scenes do you want? Let's say 3 scenes there. So now what it's going to do, hopefully, is going to give us a bit more detail based on our little rewrite there. What it's done is it's given us 3 scenes. The scene opens with Jane walking into the stable. We see her meet her horse, Goldie, and begin to groom her. We also meet Anthony, a boy of Jane's age who is looking after the horses. Anthony is not interested in Jane, but Jane likes him. Scene 2. scene opens with Anthony talking to his mother about the horses. Anthony's mother tells him that she wants him to be more like his father, take an interest in the horses. Anthony tells her that he doesn't want to be like his father. We see Jane walking in the stable. She sees Anthony and tries to talk to him, but he doesn't want to talk to her. Then scene 3 with Jane in the stable. She sees Anthony and tries to talk to him. Jane gets angry and tells him that she doesn't want to talk to him either. Well, it's okay, but I think we'll do it again. Let's redo that. So, no, let's try again. You have to kind of redo this a few times just to see what you get. Scene 1, Jane walks into the stable. She smiles when she sees her horse and starts to groom the horse. Anthony walks into the stable. That's a little bit boring as well. What you're aiming to do, Jane arrives at the stable. She's excited to see her horse. She greets the horse and begins to groom it. Scene 2, Anthony's introduced. He's a boy of her age. He's not interested in her. Scene 3, Jane continues to try and get Anthony to pay attention to her, but he remains uninterested. Well, okay, that sounds fine. So we'll take that. I'm going to make a new folder and put those extra scene 3 breakdown. So what I've got now is I've got scene 1, 2 and 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 there. Now scene 3 I've broken down into some more scenes, so I'm going to delete the original scene 3. And in this folder, oops, forgotten to save it. In this folder, we've now got the new parts of this scene. So we've created scene 1, 2, and then scene 3 has been broken down into 3 parts, and then scene 4, 5, 6, 7. Now that's a little bit confusing, but luckily I've created another utility which allows you, let me open it up, to renumber the scenes. So this is just a little program that I've written, which you can. What it allows you to do is select the first scene, select where I want to put my finished scenes, new folder. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. It's now asking me where scene 3 is, because obviously scene 3 I deleted scene 3 because I'd replaced it with the scene 3 in the 3 breakdown scenes there. There you go. So we'll do that. It's now asking where the one that comes after scene 4 is. So got to find that. Go to scene lists and scene 4. Right. So what I've now done, with this little utility, you've now got 9 scenes, and as you can see, scene 1 is what it was before, scene 2 is what it was before, scene 3 is our new scene 3, it's her arriving at the stable, for introducing Anthony, trying to get Anthony to get Anthony's attention, and then we move on to her finding the lost dog. So there you go. What we're doing here is we're trying to create a series of scenes where every scene of our story is an individual numbered text file, which we're then going to work on individually And this is the weakest part of the artificial intelligence, which I haven't managed to solve yet. But let me just expand this picture. So this is the weakest part of the artificial intelligence, which I haven't managed to solve yet, which is breaking the story down into scenes. What we need before we can proceed to actually do something with these scenes, which we're going to do in the next episode, the next video, is we have to get a really, really detailed description of what happens in every scene. And before, so we have to do that before we can move on, and we have to do that manually. But you'd want to do that anyway, I think, as a writer. You'd really want to get involved in the nitty-gritty of your story and all the little ideas and little stories that make up your story. So rewriting all these scenes so that they're quite detailed and say exactly what you want to happen is the next stage. Okay. So that's it. We've gone from nothing to 10 or 20 story ideas, and then we've taken those story ideas and broken them down into scenes. And then we've taken those scenes and broken them down into more detail and more detail to create a more complicated story. The key here is rewrite, rewrite, rewrite. Work on those scenes until you've got a detailed breakdown of how you imagine your story being told. Use as much or as little of the AI's ideas as you want. You're in the driving seat. And when you've done that, let me know in the comments if anything interesting comes up. And then I'll be posting another video where we're going to take those scene files and turn them, I kid you not, into an actual movie script. Don't believe it? Check out part 3.